The night had settled over the small cafe like a velvet curtain, soft and quiet, except for the nervous sound of a single wheelchair being adjusted near the entrance. The young woman in it, frail-looking, wrapped in a pale blue sweater, hair loosely tied back, kept her eyes lowered, as if ashamed to be seen. To anyone watching, she was a picture of vulnerability, helpless, poor, paralyzed. But what no one in that cafe knew, not the barista cleaning glasses behind the counter, not the couple arguing softly in the corner, not even the waiter hurrying with a tray, was that the woman sitting so still in that chair was neither poor nor paralyzed. She was hiding behind a carefully constructed facade, waiting for a man she had never met to walk through those doors and discover the version of her she wanted him to believe. The evening had been planned with almost surgical precision. The wheelchair borrowed from a clinic she volunteered at, the old sweater that looked 2 sizes too big, the worn-out shoes intentionally scuffed, the makeup lightened to make her seem pale and fragile. Everything about her appearance told a silent story of hardship. She looked like someone life had beaten down so badly she had forgotten how to get back up. And she needed him, the stranger she would meet on this blind date, to believe it. She wasn't playing a prank. She wasn't doing this for fun. She had her reasons, buried so deep inside that even she barely understood them anymore. But tonight, everything was supposed to go according to plan. Yet, something was already off. She could feel it. There was a strange tension in the air, something that made her grip the armrest of the wheelchair a little tighter. The cafe felt too quiet, the lights too dim, the people too distracted. Her heart pounded every time someone walked in, but none of them were him. She tried to steady her breathing, rehearsing in her head how she would lower her voice, how she would move only her upper body, how she would allow her hands to tremble just enough to appear fragile but not theatrical. She believed she had thought of everything. Then, without warning, a waiter rushed past her, juggling 2 cups of coffee on a small tray. He wasn't looking at her at all, his eyes glued to the wrong table number, and before she could even react, he made a sharp turn, bumped into her wheelchair, and nearly sent the cups flying. One of them splashed on the floor beside her, scattering droplets of hot liquid dangerously close to her feet. She gasped, instinctively pulling her leg back to avoid the spill. A small, involuntary movement, quick, precise, unmistakably reflexive. The waiter froze. The couple in the corner stopped talking. Even the barista looked up. For a moment, the entire cafe held its breath. Her heart slammed inside her chest as she realized what she had just done. A paralyzed woman does not pull her leg back. A paralyzed woman doesn't react that fast. A paralyzed woman doesn't do that. The waiter stared at her, confused, his brows furrowing as if his mind was trying to reconcile what he had just seen with what she appeared to be. She tried to mask the panic rising through her body, gripping the armrest again and forcing her legs to go still. Too late, the damage was done. And before she could say anything, before she could think of an excuse or a lie or a believable explanation, another voice cut through the tension, a deep voice. Familiar only through textmessages.com. Warm. The voice of the man she had come to meet. "Are you Elena?" Her breath caught. She turned her head slowly toward the entrance, where he stood tall, neatly dressed, face soft but observant. This was him, the man she had lied to, the one she wanted to impress, the one she wanted to fool. He looked at her wheelchair, then at the puddle on the floor, then at the waiter's stunned expression. Something flickered in his eyes: curiosity, confusion, concern, even suspicion. Everything she didn't want him to feel. And then, as if destiny enjoyed playing cruel games, the waiter, still shaken, pointed at her leg. She moved, he muttered under his breath. The man's gaze shifted sharply to her again. Not unkind, but sharper, more analytical. The room felt smaller, her breathing shallow, her pulse too loud. This was not the beginning she had planned, not even close. Something inside her whispered that this night was about to unravel in ways she never expected. But to understand how everything happened, we need to go back to the beginning. From the outside, Elena's life looked painfully ordinary, almost invisible, the kind of existence people walked past without ever stopping to wonder who she really was. She lived in a small studio apartment above a convenience store. The kind of place where the walls were thin enough for her to hear every argument, every late-night delivery, every lonely sigh that wasn't her own. Her mornings were predictable to the point of repetition. She woke before the alarm, stared at the ceiling for a moment as if trying to remember why she should get up, and then forced herself into motion. There was no glamour in her routine, no spark that might suggest the dramatic events that were about to change everything. She simply brewed cheap coffee, tied her hair back, and stepped into a world that rarely noticed her. She worked at a modest community center. Not because it paid well, it didn't, but because it was the only place where she felt she mattered. There, she helped elderly people fill out forms, guided children through after-school activities, and occasionally assisted in physical therapy sessions for patients recovering from accidents. It was during those sessions that she learned details she never imagined would one day be used for a lie. How a person in a wheelchair positioned their weight, how their hands moved, how their legs stayed still, even when their eyes wanted to scream. She absorbed it all with a quiet intensity, not because she planned anything at the time, but because she found the human spirit fascinating, how fragile and resilient it could be simultaneously. But beneath all this, Alina carried a deep, unspoken loneliness, a sense of inadequacy that clung to her like damp air. She wasn't poor, exactly, but she constantly felt one step away from losing control. She wasn't unattractive, but she rarely believed anyone would truly see her. She wasn't broken, yet she couldn't shake the feeling that something inside her had cracked long ago and never healed quite right. She wanted connection, but the fear of being disappointed or judged always won the battle. It was easier to stay small, unnoticed, safe. And so when her friend Clara insisted on setting her up on a blind date with a genuinely good man, Alina resisted at first. She didn't want to be seen, not like that. She didn't want to risk being another second choice or another woman someone tolerated out of politeness. But Clara pushed, argued, insisted that Alina deserved more than her quiet shadows. Eventually, Alina agreed, not because she believed she was ready, but because she was tired of saying no to life. The first messages with him, Michael felt surprisingly effortless. He was kind, curious, gentle with his words. He didn't pry, didn't boast, didn't try to impress her with grand gestures. It was precisely this sincerity that terrified her. For the first time in years, she felt the possibility of being genuinely liked, and that possibility felt dangerous. Because deep down, Alina didn't believe she was enough. That was when the idea took root. Small at first, like a whisper she could ignore. What if she didn't show up as herself? What if she lowered expectations so dramatically that whatever she did afterward would seem admirable, even extraordinary? What if she could control the impression he formed of her right from the start? She convinced herself it wasn't manipulation, it was protection. If he liked her despite the challenges, despite the hardship she pretended to have, then maybe he would truly appreciate her. Maybe she could feel worthy in a way she never had. It was a twisted logic, but in Alina's fragile emotional state, it made sense. And so, she began to plan. She borrowed a wheelchair, picked out clothes that made her look delicate, vulnerable, someone who had endured too much. She imagined how he might look at her with compassion rather than scrutiny. She believed foolishly that this lie would make her more lovable. On the day of the date, her nerves were shattered, but she hid it under layers of forced calm. She rehearsed her movements, practiced the stillness of her legs, the softness of her voice, the humility of her smile. But even in her preparation, there was a lingering piece of her that hoped he wouldn't show up, that the universe would save her from her own mistake. And yet, beneath all her fears, something tugged her forward. A desire to finally be seen, even if she had to hide behind a lie to get there, a hunger for connection that overpowered her guilt. This was the fragile, complicated woman sitting in that cafe when everything began to fall apart. Someone desperate to be loved but afraid to be known. Someone who believed her truth wasn't enough. And that is why, when the waiter bumped into her, when her leg moved and shattered the illusion, her panic wasn't only about being caught in a light, it was about losing the chance she thought she finally had, the chance to be chosen, to be valued, to not feel invisible one more time. This was Alina before the storm, before the unraveling, before the revelation that would change not only the date, but the entire direction of her life. A woman who stepped into a lie because she didn't know how to step into her own worth. Michael's first impression of Alina had been shaped entirely by their message's soft laughter, typed in lowercase. A gentle curiosity in her questions, a sense of kindness so natural it didn't feel rehearsed. He imagined someone modest, maybe shy, maybe a little unsure of herself, but genuine in a way he rarely encountered. What he didn't expect was the woman he saw when he walked into the cafe, small, fragile, sitting in a wheelchair that looked far too heavy for her thin frame. For a moment, he hesitated at the doorway. Not because he was shocked, but because he wanted to give himself time to adjust the picture he had built in his mind. As he approached, he noticed every detail that Alina had prepared. The worn sweater, the tired eyes, the stiffness in her posture, all perfectly aligning with someone who had endured hardship. And at first, he felt his heart soften. There was a vulnerability in her presence that made him instinctively want to protect her. But then he saw the waiter's stunned expression. He saw the splash of coffee on the floor. And he saw he was absolutely certain he saw her leg move. A movement so natural, so instinctive, that no person with paralysis from the waist down could have made it. He didn't say anything at first. He didn't accuse her, didn't question her, didn't let his expression betray the sudden confusion clouding his thoughts. Instead, he offered a gentle smile, the kind reserved for delicate moments. "Are you Alina?" he asked softly. She nodded, her hands gripping the armrest in a way that almost looked painful. And he could tell her fear wasn't about the spill or the scene. It was something deeper, something she carried with her long before this moment. Michael took a seat across from her, pulling out the chair slowly, deliberately, as if giving her time to breathe. The waiter apologized again, cheeks red from embarrassment, but Michael waved it off politely. Only after the waiter walked away did Michael let his gaze settle on her fully. Her eyes darted away from his, landing anywhere but his face. Her breathing was shallow, her shoulders tense, her voice barely above a whisper when she finally said, "I'm so sorry about that. I didn't expect." But she didn't finish the sentence. It hung between them like a loose thread. He didn't ask about the leg, not yet. Instead, he asked her about her day, about her work, about anything that might ground her. But every answer she gave seemed slightly off, too careful, too polished. Her voice trembled at the wrong moments. Her eyes flickered whenever he spoke with kindness. There was a fragility to her, yes, but there was also a strange inconsistency, like someone trying to play a role they hadn't fully rehearsed. As the conversation continued, Michael noticed more signs, subtle but unsettling. When the server returned with menus, Alina instinctively reached for hers with surprising agility before quickly pausing as if realizing she had moved too freely. When he made a light joke, she laughed a beautiful sound, but her shoulders shook. Something that shouldn't have happened if her lower torso were truly immobile. And when she shifted slightly in her chair, trying to discreetly adjust the sweater slipping from her shoulder, Michael saw a flicker of natural movement in her hips, small, almost invisible, but unmistakably real. He didn't confront her. A confrontation would shut her down. Instead, he observed, watched her hands fidget, watched her breathe, watched the occasional flash of guilt cross her expression, and then there was the moment that changed everything, the moment he knew, without doubt, that the woman sitting before him was hiding more than just her mobility. When he leaned in a little closer, asking if she was comfortable, she nodded too quickly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. For just a second, she lifted herself ever so slightly in the chair to readjust her posture. A tiny lift, barely half an inch, but an impossibility for someone paralyzed. He inhaled slowly, not in anger, not in judgment, but in realization. Something was wrong, deeply wrong, and it wasn't just the lie. There was fear in her eyes, a fear so raw that Michael wondered if she expected him to walk away the moment he noticed. And that fear hurt him more than the deception itself. Still, he needed to be certain. He carefully asked her how long she had been using the wheelchair. Her answer came too fast, too smooth. "A few years," she said, but there was no history in her voice. No weight, no memory behind the words. It was a story she had borrowed, not lived. But the strangest moment, the one he couldn't ignore, came when her phone buzzed on the table. She reached for it out of instinct, and as her fingers brushed the screen, a notification lit up. "Don't forget the chair is due back tomorrow." Michael blinked. Borrowed, returned. What kind of wheelchair had a due date? He looked back at her, their eyes finally meeting in a moment that felt almost suspended in time. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but no sound emerged. She looked like someone standing on the edge of a cliff she had climbed by mistake. And for the first time since he sat down, Michael wasn't confused anymore. He was concerned, deeply. Something wasn't right. Something wasn't adding up. And he had no idea that the truth, when it finally came out, would be far more complicated than a simple lie. The evening unfolded like a series of tiny, unsettling glitches, each one small enough to dismiss on its own, but together forming a pattern Michael could no longer ignore. What began as mild confusion soon evolved into a quiet unease settling in the pit of his stomach. Lena's behavior didn't match the narrative her appearance was trying so desperately to tell, and the inconsistencies were starting to stack up like a house of cards begging to collapse. The first sign was subtle: her reaction time. Whenever someone walked behind her wheelchair, she turned her upper body too naturally, too fluidly. As if her torso wasn't trying to compensate for immobility, her shoulders shifted in ways that didn't align with a paralyzed posture. At one point, when the air conditioning kicked in unexpectedly, she instinctively tucked one of her feet back, just a small, almost invisible adjustment, but one that snapped Michael's attention back to her legs like a magnet. He pretended not to see. He pretended a lot that night, but his mind was taking notes, one suspicion at a time. Then came her reactions. Whenever he asked something personal, not too invasive, just warm, human questions, she hesitated in strange ways. Not shy, not embarrassed, more like someone mentally checking if the answer aligned with the character she was playing. When he asked where she had lived before, she blinked twice, as if flipping through an invisible script. When he complimented her strength for going out, despite physical challenges, she swallowed hard, almost offensively, as if the praise hit an exposed nerve. Her smile was beautiful but fragile, cracking at the edges when he mentioned anything remotely tied to her condition. Her emotions didn't follow a natural flow either. She jumped from nervous laughter to sudden silence, from timid smiles to sharp, startled glances, as though every gesture was carefully calculated, barely rehearsed. It wasn't the behavior of someone hiding a physical impairment, it was the behavior of someone hiding an emotional truth. And that, more than the wheelchair, was the real mystery tonight. The contradictions grew more alarming when her purse slipped off her lap and fell to the floor. The sound it made wasn't loud, but it startled her enough that she instinctively bent forward, not slightly, not hesitantly, but with the kind of full-body movement that required complete control of her core. She caught herself too late, freezing halfway through the motion as if realizing the trap she had walked into. Her eyes darted toward him, wide and terrified, before she quickly stiffened and struggled to maintain the illusion. Michael offered to help, leaning down to pick up the purse. But as he did, he couldn't help noticing what spilled out: a physical therapy ID badge with her name on it. Not as a patient, as a volunteer. His heart skipped. She tensed. Silence thickened the air. She hurried to grab the items, shoving them back into the purse with shaking hands. "Thank you," she whispered, forcing a smile that didn't touch her eyes, but the slip had cost her. It was impossible now to explain away. Why would a paralyzed woman have a volunteer ID for a physical therapy program? Why did she move with quick reflexes? Why was her wheelchair borrowed? Still, Michael didn't confront her. There was something hauntingly sad about her, something deeply human beneath the layers of invented fragility. He found himself wondering not what she was lying about, but why she felt she needed to lie in the first place. But the strangest moment of all came when a server accidentally dropped a tray near their table. The loud clatter startled both of them, but her reaction was instantaneous. She flinched, actually lifted one of her legs a few centimeters, as if protecting it from something that could hit her. It was instinct. Pure, undeniable instinct. And it was the final crack in her illusion. Michael felt the truth hovering at the edge of their date like a storm cloud ready to break open. He watched her shrink, watched her avoid his eyes, watched her retreat into herself inch by inch. She wasn't a manipulator. She wasn't cruel. She was scared, desperately scared of something she refused to name. He leaned his elbows on the table, softening his voice as he asked, "Alina, are you all right?" Her breath hitched. Her hands trembled slightly. And as she forced another fragile smile, he realized with a sinking feeling that the wheelchair wasn't the lie that mattered most tonight. The lie was a symptom, The wound underneath was much deeper, much older, and far more tragic than he could imagine. Whatever Alina was hiding, it was only the beginning. The cafe's warm glow no longer felt comforting. Instead, the lights seemed to expose every crack in Elena's facade, every contradiction she tried so desperately to conceal. The tension was no longer an undercurrent, it was becoming the dominant force at their table, tightening around the conversation like invisible hands. And Michael felt it all, the unease radiating from her posture, the nervous tremble in her fingers, the haunted way her eyes flicked toward the door as if contemplating escape. But it wasn't just her demeanor that shifted. The environment around them began to feed the unease. A group of teenagers entered, loud and energetic, drawing attention toward Elena's wheelchair with curious glances. The barista kept looking over, sensing something off. Even the waiter, who had nearly exposed her secret earlier, avoided their table with guilty vigilance. The atmosphere felt charged, as if everyone present was unconsciously waiting for the truth to surface. And the signs continued. When Michael gently asked her what she did for work, she hesitated too long. Panic flickered in her eyes before she blurted something vague about helping at a center. When he followed with a harmless, "That sounds rewarding, what do you do there?" Her throat tightened. She swallowed twice, forcing a smile that wavered uncontrollably. Suddenly she deflected, complimenting the cafe's decor, changing subjects unnecessarily, her voice cracking mid-sentence. It was a clumsy pivot, one that revealed more than it hid. Then came the moment when her phone buzzed again. She fumbled to silence it, but the sudden movement caused her sweater sleeve to slide down her arm just enough to reveal a small bruise, not faded, fresh, purple at the edges. Michael noticed her stiffen, tugging the sleeve back into place as if it were burning her skin. The bruise was no accident, and if she wasn't physically disabled, then what kind of struggle was she trying to conceal? Michael's chest tightened. This was no longer about deception. This was about survival. As he tried to redirect the conversation back to safer territory, the tension escalated. Elena's eyes darted toward the windows. Every time someone entered, she flinched as if expecting someone specific, someone she feared to walk in. Her breathing grew shallow, and sweat gathered at her temples. The lie about the wheelchair suddenly felt like a desperate shield. A disguise meant not to deceive Michael, but to hide from a threat lurking somewhere beyond the cafe walls. A server passing by accidentally knocked a fork off a nearby table. The clang echoed sharply. Alina recoiled so violently she nearly tipped the wheelchair backward. Her hands flew to the table for support, gripping the edges with strength she had been pretending not to possess. The other patrons stared for a moment, startled by the intensity of her reaction. She laughed weakly, pretending embarrassment, but her eyes were drowning in fear. Michael leaned in, lowering his voice. "Alina, are you sure you're safe?" She froze completely, as if the question pierced right through the flimsy armor she had wrapped herself in. It wasn't the question of a man who felt deceived. It was the question of someone who recognized real danger in the behavior of another. But instead of assuring him, she whispered, "I don't know." The words were barely audible, not theatrical, not manipulative, just brutally honest and shivering with dread. Before he could ask more, her purse slipped again, almost as if her trembling hands weakened at the sound of her own confession. This time something else fell out, a photocopy of a restraining order, folded in quarters. Michael's breath caught, his pulse sped. He didn't reach for it, he didn't react outwardly, but everything inside him shifted. Alina stumbled through an excuse, something about mixing up documents, but her voice was trembling too much to sell it. Her eyes pleaded with him not to question it. Not here, not now. The room felt smaller. Their table, a shrinking island in a sea of rising tension, the date was no longer merely uncomfortable. It was becoming dangerous in ways neither had fully acknowledged yet. Then, just as Michael opened his mouth to ask if someone was following her, the cafe door swung open with a sharp ring from the bell above it. Elena's entire body went rigid, her breath stopped. Her hands clutched the armrests with such force, her knuckles turned white. She stared at the entrance with primal fear, so raw that it turned Michael's blood cold. Someone had walked in, someone she recognized, someone she had hoped would never find her here. And with that one look, Michael knew this lie about paralysis was nothing compared to the truth that was about to break open. The moment the bell above the cafe door chimed, Elena's entire demeanor transformed. It wasn't just fear anymore, it was terror sharpened into silence. Her breathing stopped mid-inhale, her shoulders stiffened, and her gaze locked on the entrance with a desperation that Michael had never seen in another human being. Whoever had just walked in wasn't simply familiar to her, they were dangerous to her. Michael turned subtly, careful not to draw attention. A tall man in a dark coat entered, scanning the room with the casual confidence of someone used to being in control. He wasn't looking for a table, he wasn't looking at the menu. His eyes swept across the cafe in calculated, mechanical strides left to right. Table by table, hunting, evaluating, searching. And when his gaze passed over Elena, she didn't blink. She didn't move. She didn't even breathe. She froze so completely that her lack of paralysis finally made sense. The wheelchair wasn't a lie for sympathy. It was camouflage. A disguise meant to make her unrecognizable, smaller, weaker, invisible. Michael leaned in slightly, whispering under his breath, "Elena, is that someone you know?" Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She pressed her fingertips so tightly into the armrests that it looked like the bones might break through the skin. Her eyes glistened not with tears, but with a trapped, desperate panic. Finally, after several agonizing seconds, she whispered a single word, "Yes." The man stepped farther in, his heavy boots echoing across the tile floor. He stopped near the counter, scanning again. Michael watched Elena carefully. Her pulse throbbed visibly at her neck, her hands trembling uncontrollably. She leaned forward just a fraction, breaking her fake paralysis again, but this time out of raw survival instinct. The man hadn't noticed them yet, but he would. Michael cleared his throat softly, trying to keep his voice steady. "Is he looking for you?" Elena nodded. "Barely. He can't see me," she whispered, words frantic and clipped. "Please, please, don't let him come here." Her plea wasn't dramatic. It was real, the kind of fear born from history, not imagination. Before Michael could respond, the waiter returned with 2 glasses of water, his timing disastrously perfect. "Here you go." The tray rattled as Elena flinched. The man near the counter looked up, his eyes locked onto the sound, then onto their table. Elena ducked her head instantly, pretending to adjust a napkin, hiding behind her hair. Michael instinctively leaned forward, blocking part of her from view as naturally as if he'd been doing it his whole life. The man paused, stared, narrowed his eyes, as if trying to recognize her. Michael felt his heartbeat spike with adrenaline. His jaw tightened, and he lifted the glass to his lips, pretending to be engaged in conversation. "Keep your head down," he whispered, without moving his lips. Elena obeyed instantly, her hands trembling so violently the table shook. But just when it seemed the man might approach them, another distraction cut through the tensiona phone rang loudly behind him. He answered, turning his body halfway, speaking in low, harsh words. Elena took the opportunity to exhale, though the breath quivered as it left her. Michael watched the man carefully. He wasn't a casual acquaintance. He wasn't a coincidence. He carried himself with the entitled posture of someone who believed the world around him existed to be controlled. There was an aggression simmering beneath his calm exterior, visible in the way he clenched his jaw, how he scanned his surroundings like a predator scenting prey. As he continued talking on the phone, Elena whispered urgently, "He wasn't supposed to be in this part of town. He shouldn't know I'm here." Michael didn't ask how the man knew her location. He didn't want to push her into panic, but something told him this wasn't about a relationship gone wrong or a misunderstanding. This was deeper, more sinister, he whispered. "Why is he looking for you?" Elena shook her head, squeezing her eyes shut. "I can't not hear. If he sees me like this, he'll know I left. Left, not broke up, not drifted apart. Left a word that carried escape, danger, secrecy." Suddenly, the man turned sharply and began walking toward their side of the cafe. Elena stiffened, ducking even lower, pulling the hood of her sweater a fraction over her head. Michael straightened subtly, positioning his arm on the table in a way that shielded her. The man's footsteps grew louder, closer, each one a countdown. Neither of them could stop. When he finally reached their aisle, he slowed his drifting across the tables, lingering on Michael for a moment too long. Michael held his gaze steadily, unflinching, as if daring him to keep moving. After a tense second, the man continued walking past them, heading toward the restroom hallway. Only then did Alina finally allow a tiny, trembling breath to escape. But the tension didn't fade. It intensified. Because if he was here now, then he wasn't going to stop until he found her. And Michael realized something with startling clarity. This date wasn't going to end with awkward goodbyes or polite distance. It was going to end with the truth. And that truth was going to hurt. The tension in the cafe had reached a point where even the smallest sound felt amplified, as if the entire room were suspended in anticipation. Alina kept her head lowered, her hands trembling on the armrests of the wheelchair, while Michael watched the restroom corridor like a guard posted at a battlefield entrance. He could feel that something was shifting, something deeper than fear, something about to crack open. When the man disappeared down the hallway, the temporary relief that washed over Alina was thin and fragile, barely held together by her shallow breaths. Michael leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "Alina, I need you to tell me what's going on. You don't have to explain everything, but I need to know if you're in danger." She shook her head, but it wasn't denial, it was despair. Her eyes glistened, not with tears, but with the exhaustion of someone who had been running far too long. Michael could practically feel the weight of her secrets pressing against the table between them. Before she could answer, something slipped from her sweater pocket and fell to the floor with a soft thud. A folded piece of paper, worn at the edges from being handled too often. Alina gasped, reaching for it, but Michael was quicker. He picked it up gently, unfolding it only enough to see what was written inside. It wasn't a letter, it wasn't a receipt, it was a bus ticket one way, dated today, destination several cities away. And beneath that, taped to the corner, was a small photograph of Alina with a younger girl, maybe 8 or 9, their arms wrapped around each other, smiling. The back of the photo had a handwritten message in shaky ink. "For when we meet again," Alina froze, her face draining of color. Michael looked from the photo to Alina, then back again. "Who is she?" he asked softly. Alina instinctively clutched the photo to her chest, her eyes filling with a storm of emotions, love, fear, guilt, longing. But before she could respond, the bathroom door creaked open. Both of them jolted. The man had returned. He wasn't scanning casually anymore. His movements sharpened with purpose. His strides grew slower, more methodical, like a predator circling prey. Michael slid his hand across the table in a subtle gesture, a silent promise that he wasn't going anywhere. Alina swallowed hard, her pulse pounding so violently that Michael could see it from across the table. Trying to calm her, he leaned in again. "Alina, please. I need you to trust me. I can't protect you if I don't know what's happening." Her voice trembled as she whispered, "I shouldn't have come here. I shouldn't have dragged you into this." Dragged him? Into what? Another revelation appeared, this time inside her purse, as she attempted to hide the photo. A small metal keychain slipped out, clattering softly onto the floor. It was shaped like a tiny pair of ballet shoes. Michael picked it up. "Alina, you dance." A shattered expression crossed her face. Not fear, not loss. A deep, painful loss. But before she could answer, he noticed something else inside the purse, half hidden beneath tissues and lip balm, a folded document with official markings. He recognized the emblem immediately. He'd seen it earlier when the restraining order fell out. But this document was different, more recent, more urgent. He didn't pull it out. He didn't need to. The words on the visible corner were enough. Emergency custody review hearing. Date, tomorrow. Michael felt his breath catch. A child. A fleeing mother, a hearing, a dangerous man looking for her. It all began to align, pieces sliding into place with chilling clarity. The wheelchair disguise, the fake paralysis, the bus ticket, the panic, the restraining order, the bruise, the man scanning the cafe like a hawk. This wasn't a lie built to manipulate someone for sympathy on a date. This was a woman running for her life. And possibly for her daughters. Elena's eyes widened as she saw understanding dawn in Michael's face. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "Please, don't say anything. If he recognizes me, everything I've done, everything I'm trying to do, it all falls apart." Michael nodded slowly, his jaw tightening. He wasn't angry at her deception anymore. He wasn't confused. He wasn't even hurt. He was scared for her, deeply, instinctively. But the revelations weren't over, because at that very moment, the man reached into his coat and pulled out a folded photograph of someone. He stared at it, then looked directly toward their table. Michael's heart stopped, Elena's hands flew to her mouth. The photograph? It was her. And not the Elena sitting in the wheelchair, but the real one, standing, smiling, holding the same little girl from the photo Michael had seen. He had finally found her. The moment the man unfolded the photograph, the cafe's air seemed to thicken, heavy and suffocating, as if the world itself paused to witness what would come next. The image he held was unmistakably Elena standing tall. No wheelchair, no frail disguise, just a young woman smiling at the camera with a confidence she no longer possessed. And beside her, holding her hand, was the little girl from the picture Michael had, glimpsed bright-eyed, joyful, unaware of the shadows looming over her mother's life. The transformation in the man's expression was chilling. Recognition sharpened his features, his pupils narrowing like a predator locking onto its target. He lowered the photograph slowly, eyes sweeping across the cafe, again but this time with purpose, with certainty. With the unmistakable focus of someone who knew his prey was close enough to touch, Elena's breath turned into a strangled gasp. She pressed herself deeper into the wheelchair, shrinking as if hoping the seat would swallow her whole. Her hands clamped onto the armrests so fiercely that Michael worried she might injure herself. The trembling in her fingers spread to her arms, her shoulders, her entire being. This wasn't fear anymore. This was pure terror. The kind that had been accumulating inside her for months, maybe years, now erupting in the space of a heartbeat. Michael leaned toward her slowly, deliberately, making sure his movements didn't draw attention. "Elena," he whispered, "listen to me. Whatever happens, I'm here. You're not alone." Her eyes snapped to his, wide, glistening, pleading. "You don't understand," she whispered, voice cracking. "If he finds me, he'll take her. He'll take my daughter." And just like that, everything clicked. The lies, the wheelchair, the fear, the running, the hearing tomorrow, the bus ticket for a destination far from here. She wasn't just hiding from a man, she was hiding from a nightmare wearing the face of someone she once trusted. Michael's jaw tightened, anger flaring inside him. Not at her, never at her, but at the realization that this man, this cold, calculated presence, held some kind of power over her, power she was desperately trying to break free from. The man began walking between tables again, photograph in hand, approaching their side of the cafe with slow, predatory steps. Every movement he made was deliberate, controlled, confident. A man accustomed to being obeyed, a man who expected the world and the people in it to bend beneath his will. Michael reached across the table, sliding his hand closer to Elena's. "Tell me what you need," he whispered urgently. "Tell me how to help you." Elena swallowed hard, her voice barely audible. "Don't look at him. Don't let him know you're protecting me. If he suspects anything, he'll hurt you, and he'll drag me out of here." Michael kept his face neutral, but inside his pulse hammered. He wasn't afraid for himself. He was afraid for her, this fragile, brave, terrified woman who had felt forced to fake paralysis just to avoid being recognized. Then, the inevitable happened. The man reached their table. Michael felt Elena stiffen beside him, her entire body turning to stone. The man stopped, standing over them, holding the photograph at chest level. His voice was dangerously calm. "Excuse me," he said. "I'm looking for someone. Have either of you seen this woman?" Michael's breath caught. Elena's hand trembled violently on the armrest. He didn't have time to think only to react. "No," Michael said smoothly, meeting the man's eyes without hesitation. "Sorry." The man studied him hard. His gaze wasn't polite or curious, it was invasive, assessing Michael like an obstacle to be moved rather than a person to be respected. He glanced next at Elena, hovering over her with cold scrutiny. For a horrifying second, Michael feared the man would recognize her despite the disguise. Her lowered head, her oversized sweater, the wheelchair, but Elena didn't breathe, didn't blink, didn't move a single muscle. She became a statue, an echo of a life erased by fear. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the man's gaze shifted elsewhere. He muttered something under his breath, something sharp, irritated, and walked away, pacing toward the door. Elena exhaled shakily, tears spilling silently down her cheeks. But this relief was false, temporary, hollow. Because the man didn't leave the cafe. He stood at the entrance, waiting, watching every customer who approached the exit. "He's blocking the only way out," Michael whispered, horror dawning. Elena nodded, her voice trembling. He knows I'll have to leave eventually. He's done this before. Michael's hands curled into fists. He's stalking you. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. And then came the final blow, the revelation that shattered Michael's understanding of everything. Why the wheelchair, Alina? He asked softly. Why pretend you're paralyzed? Her tears fell harder now, her face breaking into a heartbreaking mixture of fear and shame. Because he's only looking for me standing, she whispered. If he sees me in a wheelchair, he doesn't recognize me. The lie wasn't meant to deceive a date, it was meant to save her life, and her daughter's. Michael leaned back, stunned, heart pounding with a new, fierce protectiveness. This wasn't just a date gone wrong. This wasn't even a secret unraveling. This was a woman fighting for freedom, and tonight the truth had finally surfaced. The cafe felt unbearably small now, as if the walls were inching inward with every passing second. Elena's secret had shattered open between them, exposing raw truths she had tried so desperately to bury. And as she sat trembling in the wheelchair, her disguise slipping piece by piece, Michael understood that the next words out of her mouth weren't just going to be explanations. They were going to be confessions. Her hands shook uncontrollably. Not from the cold, not from the discomfort of the chair, but from exhaustion, the exhaustion of carrying fear for far too long. She wiped her cheeks with the sleeve of her sweater, her breath catching as she attempted to gather herself. Outside the cafe's window, the man stood near the entrance like a sentinel, checking every reflection, surveying every face passing by. His silhouette cast a long shadow across the floor, reaching all the way to their table like a threat made visible. Alina, Micah said gently, leaning closer so that only she could hear. Tell me what he did. Tell me why you're running. She flinched at the word running. Her voice cracked when she began. I know you think I lied just to manipulate the date, but that's not what happened. I didn't want to lie to you. Her breath broke. I didn't have a choice. Michael didn't speak. He didn't rush her. He simply nodded, letting her know he was listening, that he wasn't going anywhere. Elena's gaze drifted to the table, unfocused, as if she were staring into memories she wished she could erase. His name is Daniel, she whispered. We were together for 4 years, and in the beginning, he wasn't like this. He was charming, attentive, warm. He made me feel seen. The irony sent a shiver through Michael. The same longing Alina carried now, the need to be seen, had once been the very thing that trapped her. But it changed, she continued, her voice hollow. Slowly, so slowly, I didn't notice at first. He became controlling. He started isolating me. He'd make decisions for me. He'd track where I went, check my phone, choose my friends. Her fingers dug into the armrest again, knuckles whitening as her memories dragged her deeper. He'd apologize every time he'd cry, blame stress from work, say he only acted out because he loved me. She shook her head, disgusted. But then the apologies stopped. The shouting started, and then the hitting. Michael felt rage boiling inside him, but he kept his face steady. Safe. She needed that right now. I tried leaving twice, she said. Both times he found me. Both times he dragged me back. He always said the same thing. You're nothing without me. You can't survive on your own. Tears fell again, and I believed him. For too long, I believed him. Michael reached out, placing his hand gently over hers. She didn't pull away this time. She held on. But everything changed when Sophia was born, Alina whispered. The name softened her expression instantly. My daughter. She became my whole world. She brushed a hand over the photo hidden in her pocket. When he hurt me, I could take it. But when he started yelling at her, when he grabbed her arm hard enough to bruise, something inside me broke. Her voice cracked, and she clenched her eyes shut, as if reliving it. I took her while he was at work. I left everything behind. Clothes, money, documents, everything except her. I didn't care if I ended up on the street. I just had to get her away from him. Michael exhaled shakily. Suddenly, every clue made sense. The bruise, the restraining order, the emergency custody hearing. I filed for a restraining order the next day, she said, but he has connections. People who believe him, people who think I'm unstable. Her breathing hitched. Tomorrow's hearing decides if I keep custody. If he gets even one chance to talk to a judge privately, I could lose her. She lifted her trembling hands to her face, shame pouring out of her in waves. I thought, if I pretended to be someone else, if I looked weak, invisible, unrecognizable, he wouldn't find me. And I wouldn't put anyone in danger. Her voice cracked completely. I didn't mean to lie to you, Michael. I didn't go on this date to deceive you. I went because Clara said you were kind, because she said you were safe, and I just wanted to feel normal for one night. Michael felt something break inside him, something protective, fierce, determined. This wasn't a woman who lied for attention. This was a woman who lied to survive. He squeezed her hand firmly. Alina, you don't have to be ashamed of protecting yourself. Or your daughter. She shook her head. But I dragged you into this. He could hurt you. Michael glanced toward the entrance, where the man still stood like a statue carved from violence. He wasn't leaving. He wasn't giving up. He was waiting for Alina to slip. I'm not worried about me, Michael said softly. Right now, we need to make sure he doesn't take you, or find her. Elena's eyes widened. What are you saying? Michael straightened his posture, resolve settling over him. I'm saying, you're not facing this alone anymore. A sob escaped her, small but full of relief. She had no strength left to hide. But outside, the man shifted positions closer now, angrier, impatient. The clock was ticking, the danger was rising, and the truth had finally been spoken. Now came the consequences. The truth was out, but the moment Alina spoke it aloud, the world outside their tiny table seemed to shift into a more dangerous place. The next steps would no longer be about avoiding suspicion or maintaining her disguise. Now, everything depended on what they did next. Every second mattered. Every decision carried weight, and every breath could tilt fate in a different direction. Michael looked at the cafe's entrance again. Daniel was still there, leaning against the wall, pretending to check his phone, but very clearly watching every person who walked past him. His posture had changed. He was no longer scanning the cafe with patience. Now his shoulders were tense, jaw clenched, his foot tapping against the tile with a simmering restlessness that promised violence the moment he got what he wanted. Alina followed Michael's gaze. Her entire body tightened. He's getting angry, she whispered, voice shaking. He knows I'm close. He always knows. Michael placed a gentle but firm hand on her shoulder. Listen carefully. Leaving through the front is impossible. But there has to be another exit. There is, she said quickly. A service door by the storage room, but it's at the back. He'll see us if we cross the cafe. Michael thought fast, then we won't cross it as ourselves. Before she could question him, he stood up calmly, walked to the counter, and picked up 2 menus. Acting as if he were simply stretching his legs, he circled behind Alina and positioned the menus like shields, hiding her face from the front window. She lowered her head instantly, gripping the wheels of the chair. On my signal, he whispered, we move. But before they could take the first step, the waiter approached nervously. Sir, he whispered, glancing at the entrance. That man has been asking questions. He showed me a picture. It looked like her. Should I call someone? Michael shook his head firmly. Not yet, but I need you to do one thing: stall him if he tries to come inside again. The waiter swallowed hard, but nodded. He wasn't a fighter, he wasn't a hero, but he was human, and tonight, humanity was enough. Michael turned back to Alina. Can you move the chair without making noise? She nodded. Yes, good, let's go. Slowly, with trembling hands, Alina began to roll the chair backward, using the quietest motions possible. Michael walked close behind her, shielding her from view at every angle. They maneuvered past tables, past startled customers who sensed something was wrong but didn't know how to react. The further they moved into the back of the cafe, the louder Michael's heart pounded. When they reached the corridor, Alina whispered, "It's the second door." But just as they approached it, Michael heard the bell at the front ring sharply. Daniel had stepped inside. Alina, Michael breathed, "Don't stop, go." She grabbed the wheels and pushed harder. Footsteps echoed behind them, long strides, fast, determined. Daniel was moving. He had realized something was happening. He was coming for her. Michael stepped between the corridor and the cafe floor, blocking the view with his body. Daniel's angry silhouette appeared at the far end, scanning the back section. His eyes landed on Michael. "You," Daniel barked. "Have you seen her?" Michael didn't flinch. "I already told you." Daniel's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Funny, the waiter said this part of the cafe is staff only." Michael held his ground. "Then maybe you should respect that." Daniel took a threatening step forward. Michael felt adrenaline surge through him, but he didn't move back. He didn't tremble, he didn't budge. Somewhere behind him, he could hear the faint click of the service door unlocking. Lena had reached it. Daniel noticed the slight shift of sound. His gaze shot past Michael. "Who's back there?" Michael stepped fully into his path. "I said no one." Daniel lunged. Michael grabbed him, forcing him sideways into a shelf of takeaway cups. The impact sent a loud crash through the cafe. Customers gasped. Someone screamed. The waiter shouted, "Stop." Daniel roared in frustration, trying to shove past Michael. But Michael held on long enough, just long enough for Alina to slip through the service door and vanish into the night behind the building. The moment she was gone, Michael released Daniel and stepped back with raised hands. Daniel scrambled past him, bursting through the service exit, but the alley outside was empty. She was gone. She had escaped. Daniel stood there, breathing hard, fury radiating off him in waves. He turned back toward Michael with a look that promised retaliation. "You have no idea what you've done," he hissed. Michael didn't respond. He didn't need to. He walked past Daniel, re-entered the cafe, and let the door swing shut between them, leaving Daniel alone with nothing but his rage and the realization that he had lost her tonight. And then, for the first time all evening, Michael let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. The consequences were no longer coming. They were already here. And everything from this point forward would be different for all of them. The alley was quiet now. The chaos from moments earlier had dissolved into a strange, peaceful stillness, broken only by the distant hum of traffic and the soft rustle of wind pushing through the narrow space behind the cafe. Michael stepped outside after making sure Daniel had stormed off in the opposite direction, disappearing into the night like a man defeated but not destroyed. He knew this wasn't the end for Daniel, not truly. Men like him didn't accept defeat. They simmered, they planned, they tried again. But tonight, Alina had won the first battle she had fought in years. Michael scanned the alley, searching for any sign of her. For a fleeting moment, he feared she might have collapsed from exhaustion or panic somewhere along the walls. But then, from the darker corner near a small gate, he heard a soft, shaky breath. He walked toward the sound, careful not to startle her. "Alina," he whispered, "it's me." She stepped out from the shadows, the wheelchair now abandoned. She was standing finally free of the lie she had carried all night. Her knees were weak, trembling beneath her, but she stood with a kind of fragile pride. Tears streaked her cheeks, mixing with the cold night air as she wrapped her arms around herself, shivering. "I thought he would catch me," she said, her voice cracked, small. "You're safe," Michael answered gently, "at least for tonight." She let out a breath that sounded like relief and heartbreak at the same time. "You shouldn't have helped me. You didn't owe me anything." Michael stepped closer, not touching her, but close enough that she could feel the warmth of someone willing to stand beside her. "Maybe not," he said, "but nobody should face something like that alone." She shook her head slowly. "I lied to you. From the moment you walked in, I lied. And still," her voice broke, "still, you protected me." Michael gave her a soft, steady look. "People lie for many reasons, Elena. Some lie to deceive. Some lie to manipulate, but some lie because they've been hurt so deeply that the truth feels dangerous." Alina turned her face away, tears slipping quietly across her skin. "I wanted one evening, just one, where someone saw me as something other than a victim. And you deserve that," Michael said, "not just tonight, every day." Her breath trembled, but a small, fragile smile pulled at the corner of her lips. For the first time since the date began, she didn't look scared. She looked human again. Human, but healing. Michael glanced back toward the service door behind them. "Your hearing is tomorrow, and you're going to walk into that courtroom as yourself, not in a wheelchair, not in hiding. As a mother fighting for her daughter." Alina wiped her eyes. "I don't know if I'm strong enough." He held her gaze firmly. "You just outran the man who spent years trying to break you. And you kept yourself together long enough to protect your daughter, your dignity, and your future. You're stronger than you'll ever give yourself credit for." The silence between them shifted, then no longer weighted by fear or lies, but by something softer, something honest. The first sign of hope she had allowed herself to feel in far too long. She stepped closer. "Thank you, Michael, for everything. I don't know how to repay you. You don't owe me anything," he said simply. "Just take care of yourself. And your little girl. That's enough. Another silence fell, but this one was gentle, almost warm. Alina looked toward the street, where the lights glowed softly through the alley's opening. I should go, she murmured. I need to be ready for tomorrow. Michael nodded. Do you have somewhere safe to stay? She hesitated. A shelter arranged by my lawyer? It's not much, but it's safe. He nodded again. Good. Alina stepped back, taking one last look at him. The kind of look someone gives the person who pulled them out of a storm they never believed they'd escape. And then, with a deep breath, she turned and began walking toward the gate, each step slow but determined. Before she disappeared from view, she looked back one final time. Michael, yes. Her voice softened into something almost tender. You saw me tonight? Not my disguise? Not my fear me? And, with that, she walked away, leaving the alley quieter, lighter, and somehow changed. Michael exhaled, leaning against the wall as the night air wrapped around him. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring for her. He didn't know if the hearing would go in her favor, or if Daniel would try again. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. Some moments define us. Some choices reveal who we truly are. And sometimes, the smallest act of compassion becomes the turning point in someone's entire life. Alina had walked into the cafe, trapped in fear. She walked out standing on her own, and for the first time in years, she had a chance not just to survive, but to begin again.